You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch our problematic faves and talk about why we can love them anyway. Does that... I kind of stole it from you, Jodie, to be clear. I was floundering over here a little bit about how to introduce this one. Is that... You think that's how you would have...
That's probably where I was going with this. Yeah. This is going to be an interesting one. I feel like this is like... This is... This is tapping into the, should I write a paper about this part of my brain? Other people have done this already and better than I could, but I got academic with this one again.
I love that it's like a defense mechanism for us.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm struggling. What has everybody else said?
Yeah.
I need help.
What can I find on JSTOR?
This is the biggest example of a movie where I thought that I knew what I was going into. I was like, I'm ready. I know there's going to be some stuff that is, a little problematic but it's, it's a feature, or not a feature of the time, but it's a product of its time. And then I was, maybe 15 minutes in, and I was like, oh no. Mm-hmm. Oh no, this might be. But I think that you and I landed, listeners will come along our journey with us. I think today we'll kind of work through this, and
we should probably first tell them though who we are and what we're doing.
Oh my God, so true.
Not that they don't know, but
I'm Andrea
and I'm Jodie,
and we watched
Chasing Amy. Yeah, 1997. Kevin Smith, technically the third in his Jersey Trilogy, as it's been called.
Mm-hmm. I saw this the first time. It would have been at the height of my Kevin Smith love.
Yeah.
I think I told
Same.
folks last week I saw Dogma 3 times in the theater.
Yeah.
I was deep in the Smith lore. And I would have been probably about 12 or 13 the first time I saw this movie. And when I saw this movie, I already knew Clerks and Mallrats by heart.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's important to say that because I am coming from a place of very, not just love, but, so much of who I am is shaped by these movies.
Me too.
So it's, I'm coming from a place of love as we talk about Chasing Amy.
Yeah, I think I texted you last night and said, I said, I'm terrified we're going to have to shit all over this movie that meant so much to me. Because I, too, have a very deep love for Kevin Smith and all that he has provided for Jersey kids. The lore, the references, the feeling seen in cinema, and getting a modicum of respect for the shit that we grew up in. He
really was the first voice, and we have obviously we have more now. And
Jeremy Jasper come on our podcast.
But I think
still
that
trying.
We're just gonna keep layering that in there. But I think that he was the first one to make me realize, we should be loud and proud to be from Jersey,
Yeah, and the type of recognition that people like us got from watching Clerks and from watching Mallrats was really important. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about why this one was probably in some ways the most important to me, even though it is the most difficult also. Mm-hmm. But you cannot overstate the impact of Kevin Smith on a certain generation of Jersey people. You just can't. And I have lived for a very long time in fear of him being canceled just because he's a straight white dude from that era. And it tends to happen. And it tends to happen to people that we love. And and we should state outright, this is a Miramax movie. This was bought by Harvey Weinstein during the period when he was doing all sorts of terrible shit. At the height of his fucking rapist crime spree, right? Whatever. Mm-hmm. So, it is a fear, and I think one of the things we're going to talk about later, this documentary, there is some stuff that comes out in the filming of that documentary that does not paint Kevin Smith in the best light, but it is not, he is a toxic rapist. It's that he was the type of guy that would make this movie in the 90s.
Yeah. Again, maybe we need a little counter clicker going, but I love Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
But he is you know, what's the best a straight white dude from the 90s making a film in the 90s at his age, which was pretty young at the
27,
time.
yeah.
Like, really thinking. I also, my biggest thing for this versus his other movies, because it's like they all have the, like, kind of like that viewpoint, but this is the first one where he really tried to say something that, and like really tried to write from perspectives and point of views that weren't his own.
Yeah. I mean, he's said many times that like there was like a few specific inspirations for this movie, right? And we should probably do a quick recap of it before we get too deep, but just to follow what you were just saying, like his brother is gay. He was friends with a lot of gay people. You know, he was friends with Gwen Turner, who actually has a cameo in this movie, who is a filmmaker also, who's a lesbian. And she did have she wasn't like a full-on script reader type, but she did have input when he was making this movie. He was in a relationship with Joey Lauren Adams at the time, and that has been often quoted as inspiration for, you know, the two characters of Holden and Alyssa. And so, like, all of those things, the gay brother, the relationship with Joey Lauren Adams, and one of the reviews I watched of something online kept calling her Joey Lawrence Adams, and it drove me nuts. Joey Lauren Adams and his friendship with Gwen Turner, all of those things like are in the background of why he wanted to make this specific movie. And I do think he also has an interest in homosexual relationships and like friendships and love between men, obviously.
Yeah.
And so all of that is kind of in the background of this. And it's got a lot of shit in it that does not age well. But you know, I think that where I came down on this was with more love than discomfort.
Because I think the relationships are interesting. It's so much of what I struggle with is the specific words he puts. And I don't even just mean how free Banky is with
the F
all
word.
of his like homophobic.
Jesus fucking Christ.
The
I forgot how bad that was.
The D word. And I know
Yeah.
also, I know that it was 1997 and lots of people were way more free with those words. And that Kevin Smith is trying to like show sort of, and that like queer people like use those words all the time. And it's okay.
Yeah. And
I think
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
he's like trying to represent that in a way. And like, and that is, it's an issue that like, some of it too is like, it is so lazy to make the most homophobic character homophobic because they're in the closet.
Oh my God. No, that is on my list. So
it is so tired, but it's also, it was new for the time.
Yeah.
But I do think it's lazy and I have no patience for it.
I know.
And I never have.
I know.
Okay. What should we?
Yeah,
sorry,
we should.
What's this movie about?
Okay. So just a peek behind the curtain for our listeners, we're going to do our usual recap of this movie, but then I have asked that we do sort of a recap of all of the kind of like, almost like bullet points of the problematic shit that's in this movie because it's been covered. And so I don't think we need to sit here and belabor endlessly the problems with the language and things like that. I think we need to acknowledge them and talk about them. But I think if we start with that, then we can kind of get into a deeper conversation of like why this movie is still important, at least to me and to a few other people. So this movie is about Alyssa Jones, and not really though. It's about Alyssa Jones as seen through the eyes of two comic book writers, and a comic book artist and a tracer.
Fucking tracer.
He's a fucking tracer. Holden and Banky, played by Ben Affleck with the worst goatee ever.
Oh my God. And all you really need to know about where Kevin Smith is coming from is that he named his protagonist
Holden. No shit.
Like, yes. Kevin Smith, my friend, come on.
The I think I'm smarter than other guys jumped out, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Holden and Banky wrote a comic book about Bluntman and Chronic based on, obviously, Jay and Silent Bob, obviously. And they've got some mild success. They're living in Jersey together. They're working together. They go to a Manhattan Comic-Con of a sort. You want to say something?
I just love, like, we forget that, like, I don't know. I don't know. We probably could find out. But like comic book nerds, those were what the conventions looked like up until a point, you know? And so I really liked seeing that. Like the panel looks like any other. Yeah. Like that's every panel I presented on in an academic conference. You know what I mean? Like the niche was that small.
Oh yeah.
Like I've presented on panels in those rooms myself in a different, and it's fun to see like, right, it was such a niche thing back then.
Well, and one thing that I read when I was doing some research on this, the reaction to this film, was an interesting connection that was made by someone thinking about this who was connecting the subculture of like nerd culture and like comic book culture to queer subculture, and how in a way this movie is sort of hand-holding the straight white man and saying like, look, this is like that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, this is a thing, like your weird thing, right?
Right. People don't understand your underground culture, and you have your own ways of being in community that the greater...
And look at how you dress, and look at how the queer people dress. Not that far off, guys.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Man, that is so funny.
Yeah.
Especially now, considering the loudest, most annoying people are comic book nerds.
Well, this was like, I mean... We can say good things about Kevin Smith. We can also say that in some ways this like nerd movement empowered the worst parts of certain people. Anyway, so they're at Manhattan Comic-Con to talk about or promote their Blunt Man and Chronic, whatever. And they show up at this sort of minority panel, or what is it? They called it something like that.
It might just be called it is like it's like... I mean, unheard voices or something.
Yeah, that's not
like,
what we would call it, but
yeah.
And at this panel, they meet Alyssa Jones through Hooper, who is an interesting side character, gay black man pretending to be a militant straight man for his comics. We can dissect that or not. We'll just kind of skip over it for now. They meet Alyssa Jones. Holden falls in love with her, finds out she is a lesbian. They become friends. They have a friend montage. He's clearly falling in love with her. Eventually, this is starting to get in the way of his friendship with Banky. Banky is a homophobic asshole through most of this.
Yeah, through most of this movie, obsessed with his best friend very openly, and also a homophobic asshole.
He's the fucking worst. I hated him in the beginning when I first watched this in 97, and he does not redeem himself in a second or third or whatever 100th watch.
He also shows a child hardcore pornography.
I know.
Banky should be in prison.
Yeah, Banky is a criminal. And a predator. He also comments on a bunch of high school girls in Catholic school uniforms.
Jesus
also,
Christ.
This was so fucking common back then. Anyway, not that it was good. It was just common. The fetishizing of teenage girls.
Yeah, absolutely.
So his friendship with Banky is getting strained. He's in love with Alyssa. Eventually, they have a very histrionic confrontation in a car where he professes his love to her in a very long speech. I forgot how long that speech went on. My God.
Again, Kevin Smith.
Talk about being obsessed with yourself. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah. Where eventually he stops speaking and she gets out of the car in the rain and starts yelling.
My favorite moment, real quick, it was one of the laughs that I was tracking in this movie at first. I don't remember if I said this on mic or not, but at first I was very worried that this movie was not going to hold up. And I started tracking every time I laughed because I thought it was going to be so few and far between, which ended up not being the case. Like I said, I think we both came out on a more positive side of this than we were expecting when we started watching. But he says, "I love you," and then there's a big ominous thunderclap.
Yeah.
It's like a horror movie.
Yeah.
I thought that was a beautiful touch.
Yeah, no, that was good. So she runs out in the rain, tries to hitchhike home, which even in the 90s was a bad idea. He chases after her. They have a confrontation. She basically says, like, she's pissed. She says, I'm gay. There's this whole speech about, like, I can't do this without throwing away whatever my life currently is. And we'll talk about the implications of this conversation, I'm sure. But, and this is where, to me, the movie should have ended.
Yes.
This is it, right?
Yep.
He falls in love with her. She says, no, you idiot. I am gay.
Right.
We are friends. And walks away.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, she comes running back. They embrace in the rain. And now they're in a relationship. And the relationship seems to go okay for a bit. But his insecurity about her past is what eventually dooms them. He seems to be fine with the fact eventually that she has slept with women. But then he finds out that, no, she has also slept with men in her past. He cannot handle that. It is, you know, his idea of what sex is very heteronormative. And so it's like he thought she was a virgin and now she's not.
So crazy. Again, even for 97, that conversation feels so like...
I know, but I really think it's very 97, to be honest with you. It's rough, but it's of the time. And so his solution to her experience versus his lack of experience, and the fact that he has realized that Benki is in love with him, is this perfect answer to everyone's problems where they all have sex, and then he feels more adventurous and more on her level.
Funny. So stupid. He's so stupid.
He's so fucking stupid. And then Benki gets this out of his system or something. I don't know. But apparently this is going to solve all their problems. This does not work for anyone other than him. Alyssa basically says to him, I am not your whore. Like, I don't want to share you with anyone. I'm sad that you would want to share me. Kind of bursts the bubble of his little solution.
It's so funny how quick she realizes what he's going to ask. Yeah. She says, like, please don't say it.
Yeah.
So early into the conversation.
Yep. And so she leaves. Benki leaves. Final scene we see is at the next Comic-Con event a year later. Not maybe the next, but a Comic-Con event a year later where Alyssa is signing her books. And we see that Holden has been changed by the woman in his life and has written a book that is finally personal called Chasing Amy, in reference to Silent Bob's diatribe earlier. And she is back with a woman who seems like kind of a drip, honestly. The woman she's with does not seem like much fun.
No, it's kind of like she's dating like the Holden, like do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I think the implication is that Holden was like her soulmate, but they couldn't be together, and now they're just moving on. Like, and Benki and Holden have dissolved their partnership, and Benki is doing some child comic called something Dave. What is it called? I want to say Hey Dave, and I don't think that's it.
No, it's called, you're right though.
Baby Dave.
Boy. That's it.
Baby Dave. And that's it. And that's it. And
that's the movie.
Explaining that does not come close to talking about all of the very 90s issues and very like straight male understanding of queerness of the mid 90s.
His manic pixie dream queer.
Fucking seriously.
She is not that in this movie. It's just what Holden wants her to be in this movie.
Well,
she is thankfully not that.
She kind of is. I would argue she's closer to that than I wish she was. Like, there's a part I wrote down manic pixie dream girl a couple of times. She has more to her than that. And I agree with you on that, but I also think like she starts tap dancing at one point.
Oh, that scene is...
I'm like, what are you, Natalie Portman in Garden State?
Yeah, truly. That scene is...
Or is Natalie Portman in Garden State this?
Yeah, right. It takes a a long time for Alyssa to start to feel like her own character in this movie.
Yeah.
And that
skee ball
scene when they
where she like throws the ball and like
she's never heard of skee ball.
Yeah.
She grew up in Jersey. Like,
yeah, she's like she grew up at the shore.
Mm-hmm. Like, come on.
She's a blank slate. Like, yeah. So,
or at least that's how Holden
sees her,
and the movie sees her until you find out that she's had sex with men. Then suddenly she gets to be more complicated. It is so bizarre.
Yeah. So,
and also anytime she gets to be herself, it's in a really fraught monologue, which is really annoying.
Her
like,
monologues
she only really
are shrill.
They are shrill
to use a sexist word.
But it's true.
Yeah.
Like, she only really gets to express herself when she is either screaming at Holden about her identity
or crying
or I was going to say, no, this part isn't true. She only really gets to, like, because then sometimes she gets a long monologue where she's just describing sex to Holden.
Yeah.
Which is also annoying.
Yeah.
That scene in the park where it's like...
It's rough.
I know we're just kind of... are we in the part where we do all of our complaining? Is that what's happening? Because I have a big one.
I think we should be in that part. I do think that we could just complain randomly for a while, and I think that we should maybe structure it a little bit around the more serious issues with the movie. But
the one that I was about to complain isn't a more serious issue, so I don't know where this goes.
Well, so go for it, and I'll give you a category.
I love this. I just think if you really pull back, Holden meets a queer woman at a panel. They go to a bar together. He is annoying, but let's say they sort of hit it off. Mm-hmm. He finds out she's a lesbian. She finds out he's interested in her. Mm-hmm. And he's like kind of a shithead about it. He's like a big shithead about it. And then she shows up at his office and wants to be friends. What? Just imagine.
Well, she doesn't show up at his office. She invites him out.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. This is when he figures out that she's he finds out that she's gay, because that's when she and Banky have that scene that actually is kind of charming, where you get to see Banky kind of like connect with her, and they're sharing their stories in that like Jaws scene. And he's such a grump that whole time. So I just think, like, if you're Alyssa, you see this guy who you're like, oh, he's a nice guy, maybe we could be friends. Be a total shithead. Yeah. And then you're like, well, actually, I'm going to go to his work. I want to hang out with this guy. Mm-hmm. Okay. He's nothing but annoying.
So I have a category for this.
And then he's like, wait, and then they go to that park together, and he's like, please teach me everything. I'm going to tell you all of my terribly insensitive, dated. This is the Manic Pixie Dream Girl of it, where he's just such an oaf, and she is so patient with him.
Yep.
What's the category?
The category for this is the part of the movie where a man creates a woman that is there to validate how special he is.
God.
Right? So
she just sees something in this miserable lump.
In this, like, really mediocre, insensitive, backwards man. Right? I mean, this is Kevin Smith writing his relationship with Joey Lauren Adams in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. She is not queer, but she apparently, when they were dating, was just much more worldly and experienced than he was. She lived abroad. She was like, and she'd had like lots of, maybe not lots, but she'd had more relationship experience than him. And so it's this idea of like fetishizing this type of woman. Mm-hmm. But then also controlling her and also being like, but you do want me. Mm-hmm. Like.
Right. Because I'm so special despite all of that you still want.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. The idea
that is really hard. That is almost the harder part for me than all the rest of the issues with this movie.
Because all of us that grew up socially gendered female, but have like a queer bent, have ended up in relationships. So I'm maybe contradicting myself here. Have ended up in relationships, as far as I know, with men adjacent to a Holden, right? But looking back, it's like so clear to me that if she is as self-actualized as we're supposed to think she is in the beginning of the movie, that she would not be remotely interested in him.
Yeah, no.
Like, it never would have gone beyond, like, a friendly darts game, and then she left, and that was it.
Yeah, and like, God, there's just so much there, because it's like, also, I know everybody has said this movie, no, I'm going to contradict myself too. It's so complicated, because I know people have said, like, using the word bisexual would fix a lot of this movie.
It would also take out the whole, like, conflict in the movie, though.
Exactly. It totally wouldn't. But it's like, it's just so, I don't know. It really is. And I think it is okay for art to do what I'm about to say, which is so much of this movie is Kevin Smith working through his own insecurities.
Yes.
It's just the ways in which he does it are troublesome.
Yes. And I also want to point out, I just looked this up. 1995 was the year of the famous Newsweek cover. Do you remember this? The bisexuality cover of Newsweek?
I don't remember this.
Oh my God. This is so famous. It's a cover with 3 people on it, 2 men and a short-haired woman wearing a suit that says bisexuality, not gay, not straight, a new sexual identity emerges. So this is 2 years later that this movie came out.
I mean, we still have, like...
We got a ways to go still. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that... the thing that makes this movie... that it is a little more enlightened, I know we're still in the complaining section, but is that, again...
You think the complaining section's only going to be like 10 minutes? I've got some shit to say.
I know you said you described her as kind of a drip, and I agree, but she does, thankfully, end up with a woman at the end of this.
Yeah.
This isn't the conversation that this movie does. It's so funny. He's really trying to have it both ways, because he is... Now, man, I'm really struggling, because he does, Kevin Smith and or Holden, like, they do have the conversation of, you think that I don't know if she's the one who says, I don't know where this conversation is had. It might be Hooper, actually, that Alyssa is gay unless and until she finds the right man to turn her quote unquote straight.
Oh, Becky says that more than once. And that is one of the main criticisms of this film from the queer community, is this idea of turning a lesbian. Like,
right. But we know that she has slept with men in her past.
Right.
And we know that she ends up with, I don't know Alyssa and her new partner's story, but at the very least, she is dating a woman when we see her 1 year later.
Yeah.
So
I think the real sticking point... Yeah. But the real sticking point for people with this movie was that she refers to herself as gay constantly. And in 1997, like, gay now is a different term than it was then. In a lot of ways, people use gay to refer to lots of different queer identities. Whether that's right or wrong, it's not my place to say. But, like, gay in 1997 meant same-sex attraction and same-sex relationships. And so...
Well, and her community is all
lesbians, yeah.
And it's clearly very important to her.
Yeah. And them.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so that is where the language part of it really gets everything tangled up, you know, because it's like, she's a part of a gay community of women in New York. They're actually at Meow Mix, which was like a legendary, like, queer lesbian bar in New York that has since closed. And so, you know, there's this huge emphasis on her being gay and being a lesbian and feeling like it's all set up for it to be like he turned her. And then later on, it's like, oh, psych, she already would screwed around with men and, like, you know, but they never say bisexual. So basically, like, they're, like you said, they're having it both ways. They're, like, having this much more flexible sense of attraction and fluidity, but also using terms of the time, which are very rigid. And so it doesn't work together.
Right. And we're also supposed to think that the sex she had with men in her past were, like, aberrations or those were, like, and for Alyssa too, it seems marks against her that Alyssa at her true self is a gay woman, that she had sex with men because or again, there are so many different, this is Kevin Smith working through stuff that he's not totally equipped to be working through, I think, because what I was starting to say was like, they're like Mark's quote unquote like against her, and that Alyssa at her true self is a gay woman until she meets Holden, who is special enough to make her kind of turn on that. But at the same time, what makes Holden so like, yeah, I think this is maybe the biggest fault of this movie, is that it's not totally sure what it's trying to say.
So I feel like what you might be sort of getting at or referring to with her past is when they're at the hockey game and he confronts her about her having like a threesome with 2 guys in high school. Mm-hmm. She has this whole speech where she does defend herself. She doesn't let herself be slut shamed. Like, you know, right, she says like, I, you know, had these encounters for what I thought was love or for whatever my own reasons. You don't get to judge that, which that is sort of like when you say like he's having it a lot of different ways. One way, he's actually defending her from slut shaming. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time in that speech, she clearly has, she treats those high school encounters, relationships, whatever, with a sense of shame, even though she's saying she's not ashamed of them.
Right,
right. And they don't feel like she talks about how she didn't have any examples at home, right? There's all this like sexual deviance as response to trauma stuff that we're kind of being led to believe is under the surface here. Mm-hmm. And that completely contradicts what she's actually saying out of her mouth. Right.
Right. And the way that it folds in her, like, her being a lesbian. Like, she doesn't say outright, and that's also why I date women. But that is. She's saying, like, she sort of says, like, if I had the roadmap you had, if I didn't have to figure it out myself, I would be a straight woman.
And she also says the opposite of that. She says both things. Right. You know, she says, girls feel right to me.
Right. Right.
And so it's literally like I can hear Kevin Smith in my head trying to just write this and make it make sense and not understand where any of it's actually coming from.
Totally.
You know? I mean, to me, the big problem with Alyssa is that she is a creation of Kevin Smith, but also of, in some ways, Holden and, you know, a reaction against Banky. Like, I would never say that Kevin Smith is homophobic, right? Like, this movie has a lot of homophobic shit going on in it, but it's like, in his way, he is defending the queer people in this movie and making them protagonists. Mm-hmm. Like, it's so complicated and it's so 1997. So in our little, like, problematic recap section, right? We've got Alyssa and her sort of engagement with her own sexuality. Do you have other things to say about the way that, because you had mentioned the way that she talks about her sexuality being like really troubling in some ways?
Yeah, I just would like to spend just a little more time with that scene at the park because it's exhausting to watch, because it's also important to remember, like, they barely know each other at this point, and Holden feels so like such freedom to just say the most stupid, condescending shit about sex between women and about what, like, real sex is. I think he does outright call her a virgin in that scene. Yeah. Which I do think, I keep saying even for 97 that's pretty bad, but you're so right. No, it's not. That's a real line.
So accurate from 1997.
And it's something that some people still do believe. But she's so patient with him. Mm-hmm. She calls him on it, but she calls him on it in a very friendly, like, I just can't imagine Alyssa actually having a good time having this conversation.
I know.
But she seems to be.
I know. Can I read you a quote?
Yes, please.
There's so many quotes that I found about this specific thing, because this is a real thing. there's an article from BuzzFeed, Chasing Amy 20 Years Later by Shannon Keating, where it says, it's much less a lesbian film than it is a clueless bros coming-of-age story that just happens to have a lesbian character.
Totally.
And she exists for the most part in service of the straight dude, kickstarting his evolution without getting much in return. Ultimately, the film assumes that a lesbian can go straight, even if just for a little while, as soon as the right guy comes along. So that's one. There's so many mentions of this. This is from an article in Autostraddle called "My Rage at Chasing Amy Helped Me Find My Bisexuality," which is a great title for a article. Says, by the end of the movie, Alyssa has just been a vehicle for the personal growth of another cishet white man. He's learned to apologize, be less self-centered, and hopefully stop mansplaining sexual identity to his next partner, but her life is left virtually unchanged. Her new lover is dismissive of comics and doesn't understand her in the way Holden did. The ending was bittersweet in 1997 because it made me consider the longevity of my own relationship. Watching it now, I felt angry that Alyssa wasn't given a better new girlfriend and a chance to process her own feelings. She's a vehicle for the evolution of Holden.
Yeah. I wonder if Kevin Smith knows he set her up with a real,
dud.
a real dud. Or if he's just like, I don't know, any old lady's good for her as long as she ends up with a lady.
Because she is kind of any old lady, right?
Yeah.
If they had brought...
I think she's wearing in my head, she's wearing an Old Navy performance fleece. I don't think she is. I think she's wearing a proper vest, but it's
But emotionally, she's wearing an Old Navy performance fleece.
And a mock turtleneck.
Yeah. Yeah. If they had brought back the woman from the bar, right?
However, though, this is the thing that was confusing for me. There are a few things.
Yeah.
But one of them is I couldn't totally figure out what Kevin Smith thought of the women in this movie, because that girl is
I don't think he knew.
She wants to dance. She's kind of flighty.
Yeah.
And Alyssa says I'm not in love with her.
Yeah.
I'll fuck her.
Right.
So it's can Alyssa even really love a woman? And she goes from this kind of hot ditzy blonde to a
mousy
total bore snore.
Yeah.
And are both of those because really her real love is whole,
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, we don't get any time for her to develop any relationships with anyone else,
Right.
we see this sort of sexual relationship with the blonde woman in the bar, and we see her with her group of friends, and we see them being judgmental of her, but none of them have individual personalities or identities in relationship to Alyssa or on their own.
I think they're all blonde too. They're just all blonde white women, which is really
One of
funny.
them has
that
the Karen haircut, which is great.
Right.
But none of them are given any moment to be a part of her life, right? Her entire existence is mostly in relationship to Holden and Banky. And so we don't see her developing anything with anyone else. I think when I rewatched it this time, Gwen Turner actually plays the MC at the bar, the woman that Kevin Smith was consulting. She's fucking hot in this movie. To me, their brief interaction when she's bringing her up on stage, develop that a little bit, and then have her show up at the end and be just get a little bit more hinting that there's something there. Bring her in,
Yeah.
And she was a brunette.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There you go. Yeah, you're so right. That's the other not to defend Holden, and this is going to get problematic in its own way, that
I can't wait.
That the whole, and this is a tired story that people still like to tell, that women and men, no matter the woman's sexuality, can't be friends because a man is always trying to, you know what I mean? But
I do.
But in this movie, they aren't just she clearly, because she gives him this whole big speech when he tells her he loves her, that how unfair that is and blah, blah, blah. But he's kind of right. You don't buy art at the diner and then give a big speech about how, they were dating. You know what I mean? Just because she didn't call it that. There was a different kind of friendship happening there.
I'm so uncomfortable. Because this is so tricky, right? Well,
that's what I mean. It's both things are happening.
Yeah.
She should be able to hang out with a dude without him expecting that really she wants to fuck him. But as we find out, she does. She does want to.
I know.
So
it's so complicated because at this time of my life, when this movie came out and when I was about the age of the people in this movie, I had a lot of close friendships with men that were very complicated. And that had that sort of line that was constantly being danced on one side or the other. And I think at least in my case, I kind of didn't know what the fuck I was doing. Like, I didn't know if this was a romantic thing or a friend thing. And I think part of why this movie has sort of resonated with certain people is because there's no clean, easy answer in any of this. Like, and that's real. Like, that is closer to reality than any nice, tidy, tied up in a bow, like, you know, movie ending that we're used to seeing. Because it's true, like, she is obviously has feelings for him beyond friendship, but also there's a lot of toxic shit that comes along with being a woman, having a male friend who reads into things that are not there and then becomes aggressive or other, you know.
And I do believe that despite the relationship she's had in her past, she is living her life and feeling very much like she is a gay woman. She is a lesbian whose community is and whose identity is very important to her. That's part of it. And it's important to, like, I know the line for this movie, and I said it myself, is that, like, oh, if only the word bisexuality existed. But that's also not fair to Alyssa. Like, if Alyssa, whether she has dated men in the past or not, if at this moment in her life, Alyssa is a lesbian and that's what she calls herself, then like her, it's almost like her attraction or not to Holden is sort of beside the point, really, for the people outside. It's not really up to us to say, okay, which I did just say. I just said this, but it's not really up to us to say, like, okay, but she is clearly attracted to Holden. And so then it's unfair of her to pretend otherwise. But it's like not. Like, if she says to him, like, I can't, you know, it's not just like a throwaway decision for me. Like, this, like, turns my, and it's also putting a lot on Holden to say that, like, he's so whatever, that, like, bringing him into her life would totally turn her world upside down. Like, but, you know, all of that is happening. This is why I don't have an end to the sentence, because all of that is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
But that's, I think even in this confusion of the conversation, we're getting at why this movie meant so much to me, right? Because none of this shit is simple.
Right.
And growing up as somebody whose sexuality doesn't fit into the norm, but it also doesn't fit into the alternative to the norm.
Right.
And,
right, totally.
You know, growing up at a time when 1995, there was a Newsweek cover that was like, the new sexuality, right? Like,
and I really want our listeners to Google this because they all look like straight up villains.
Yes, they do.
They're like
the lighting is wild.
Really dramatically. Yeah. They're all like, they look like watch out or the bisexuals will get you.
Exactly. And I mean, we don't need to, I mean, dissertations have been written about the portrayal of a bisexual person, especially a bisexual woman, as either a slut, on the way to a different decision, like, you know.
They both are. A bisexual woman is just a woman who hasn't found the right man, and a bisexual man is a gay man who doesn't want to admit that he's gay. Those are the stories that have been told forever and ever and ever.
Right, and you can't trust someone who's bisexual. They're never going to stay faithful. Like, all of this stuff is just there in the ether, has been forever. But I think what people forget is that before the mid-90s, it wasn't even really a talked about identity. Like, it existed, but it wasn't a part of our conversation like it is now. Like, now we have these debates over, like, well, is bisexual the same as pansexual? And, like, is it about attraction? Is it about personality? Is it about gender? We've
gotten so in the weeds with it.
We've gotten so in the weeds with it that we forget that, like, there was a time not that long ago.
Yeah, the Newsweek caption literally says, you may have already read this, I think so, but let's just really highlight, not gay, not straight, a new sexual identity emerges.
Exactly. And so, like, the idea that we're judging a product from 2 years later and saying, clearly she's bisexual, when, like, that's not a term that was, like, commonplace in culture at the time. You know, I think that that's part of why, for certain people, this movie, regardless of the number of times that fucking Banky uses the F word, like, and I don't think we should, watching it again, it was so hard to watch those scenes because we've gotten so far away from being able to, or from accepting the use of that word by people who aren't in the community, that I think part of what's hard about it is like so many of us had words like that thrown at them as bullying, as threats, as violence, you know, and like to hear it so casually used in a movie by someone that I love, like I forgot how hard that was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
there are times where Holden calls Banky on it and he's like, hey, don't call her that, blah, blah, blah. And like calls him out for it. But then there are other times where he just throws those words around like it's almost like Kevin Smith isn't really paying attention to how free he feels writing these words.
Yeah, I think you're right that he's not really thinking about the way he's using these words because of his, you know.
But sometimes he thinks that he is. That's what's like, he's like, he's just
like, look, I'm so evolved.
He's just like slightly too evolved for his own good. He's like a little bit better than most of the people who, do you know what I mean?
I do,
but not enough to really get there. It's like but he doesn't realize that. He thinks he's like, yeah, it is. It's tough.
I think Kevin Smith himself has been extremely blunt about.
Extremely blunt man about.
He's extremely blunt man and chronic about his own point of view. So he has a post on the Criterion Collection from 2000, like 3 years after this movie came out, where he talks about this movie. And he talks about it differently now, 23 years later. But
I would love to trace this evolution.
It's interesting. It really is. And like, this is why I say, like, as of right now, still feel like Kevin Smith is someone that is worthy of my admiration in the fact that he seems to be listening and trying to evolve his own perspectives. And like, we can't really help where we started in some ways. Like, I know a lot of people, men who I love dearly, who were very much like Kevin Smith in their views on things. And I love them dearly. Like, they're trying, they're learning, you know, we're all learning, whatever. But he says, so this is from 2000. He says, these are the unspeakable ingrained mistruths men are brought up to believe about sex. We're dominant. We should go to bed with whores, but wake up with virgins. Those things that we're not necessarily taught, but that thanks to our patriarchal society still become a part of our consciousness regardless. So, and he says, and in figuring this out, one endeavors to be above such unenlightened outlooks. So this is, he's talking about how he's like, you know, whatever, evolved. Yeah. These poor slobs are called 90s liberal males, and I counted myself proudly amongst their numbers until Joey Lauren Adams. And so he talks about how dating someone like her kind of brought out how unevolved he was in some ways. You know,
I think my biggest issue is all of that is true, and I think it's, you know, I like that I like whatever, I don't know what the verb is there really, but he puts those words in Holden's mouth and Holden is challenged for thinking them.
Yeah.
But then the woman who challenges him still is attracted to him, and I just don't know how those two things can be true.
That's because he wants them to be true.
Right.
You know, this is a wish fulfillment for him, you know? Like, in the end, they don't end up together, but he comes out a good guy.
He comes out a good guy. And
he gets financial success from it, too. Or maybe not, we don't know yet, but he gets...
Right, he actually says it's a small run. But it's not financial success that Holden is seeking, because he has this comic that is pretty successful, and they want to sell, they want it to be a cartoon. But he's like above that. He's like a real artist. He just makes this comic because it's like successful. But he's got more important things to say. So,
exactly.
And I wish, you know what would really do a lot for me in this movie is if when they meet up again a year later, if she does not seem so stricken by encountering him again after a year. Like, there is pain and longing in her eyes, and it shouldn't be. Like, if she was just like, oh yeah, I remember we had that weird fucking relationship for a minute, but I just hate the idea that it's like he really was the one that got away for her. Like, that's so annoying.
I'm trying to think if there's other things we need to address in the problematic category before we move on. There is obviously the scene where her community, like, kind of shits on her for dating a man. And one of them says, "Another one bites the dust," which is an oft quote line from this movie because it is like her community holding her to the sort of like gold star standard. Right. And in some ways I think the hard part about that for a lot of people was just that Kevin Smith wrote it. Like that actually is a reference to one of Gwen Turner's movies and a scene that she wrote. That's a very similar scene where a character sleeps with a man and her friends are sort of unhappy with her about it and say that she can't call herself a lesbian because she's slept with a man.
That's what so much of the issues with this movie come down to the fact that it was written by a straight white dude. And I'm almost like, well, the one thing Kevin Smith can't help is that he's a straight white dude. So I kind of go back and forth of like, I'm going to hold his feet to the fire on all of this, obviously. But it is also kind of like, okay, well, yeah, like he is that. And so all of these things, like no matter what, no matter how you feel about them, it still comes down to the fact that Kevin Smith is Kevin Smith, and you can hold that against him. I was going to say you can hold that against him or not, but I'm doing both. So
yeah, and
I don't know.
I think where I came down on it was just that I'm not holding it against him. I am just pointing out places where he didn't see certain things.
There is also the Hooper of it all, which is another example of him almost saying some interesting things, but where I don't think he really has the I don't know that he should be trying to.
Yeah,
I don't really think
he
it's
doesn't
up
have
to
the perspective.
Him. Yeah, but he just, it's like he seems to really be wanting to comment on a lot of different social issues that aren't his to comment.
Yeah, and show how evolved he is.
Exactly, because it's like, and I don't think that it's tricky to say what perspectives is a person allowed to write from.
Oh, God,
in general, I come down on the voices you write should be your own, but I don't think that's always the case, because then that's how you end up with movies it's so complicated.
It is.
But I just think Hooper is a real miss and is almost he is also maybe my favorite character in this movie despite all that, because this is another one where it comes down to I think he is almost saying some things worth saying, and if they had come from a queer black man, if Hooper had been written by a queer black man, there would be a lot more there to talk about.
Yeah.
It just seems like Kevin Smith really feels free in this movie to write from whatever perspective he wants, whether he has the whether or not he's equipped to do so.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
There's a quote from an article in the Mary Sue titled "Bisexuality and Chasing Amy" that talks to this. It says, Alyssa Jones' story is in many ways a perfect encapsulation of biphobia in both straight and queer communities. And while I think Kevin Smith is a good and thoughtful writer when he tries, I think it is mostly by accident. Which is a harsh thing to say.
God,
but I do think he's
brutal.
But I think that in some ways he stumbles into some stuff in this that is very true to certain people's experiences that he really had no way of knowing really through his own experience. So I don't know. I think there's something to him stumbling into some real true things. Oh, one other thing that got a lot of flack, since we're talking about Hooper, was his description of lesbians. He says, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he basically says that, most lesbians don't look like Alyssa Jones. They look more like Holden. And I was like, okay. But this is what I mean. There is division, and there are... rifts in the queer community between different parts of it that are really, sort of sometimes destructive and catty and whatever. And again, I feel like Kevin Smith kind of stumbled into that.
It is another one where it's Kevin Smith, you don't get to say that though.
Yeah. Exactly. I thought we should mention that. But maybe we should move on to we'll leave aside the stuff that we know is problematic and we'll talk about the rest of it. Right? There's a lot of things in this movie that don't age well. But
But I do think there's a lot to...
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that meant a lot. And I think we talked a little bit about this idea of imperfect representation as still being representation, you know? This was so early for that kind of representation. Like, I literally did a Google search of, like, bisexual characters in TV and film. Almost all of them are from the last 15 years.
Right.
Like,
right.
There's a couple. There's, like, Willow on Buffy. There's... I know. I didn't watch Buffy really,
barely...
so I know.
I could talk forever.
Most of the people on this list are barely. They're barely.
Willow dates Oz, the love of my life, Seth Green, and then she dates Tara, the love of my life, Amber Benson.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's like, I don't think Willow never uses the word bisexual.
Oh.
Willow is a lesbian witch who dated a boy werewolf in high school.
Right. Like, you know, like you do.
Like you do. Tale as old as time.
But literally, I have a bunch of these lists, and almost...
These are all where, like, queer women... I'm going to use the word bisexual there, because I think queer, like...
Yeah.
Specifically, women who are attracted to their gender and other genders are reading bisexuality into characters that were never intended to really be bisexual. Willow, I think, is a great example. Willow is a lesbian witch who dated a man in her past.
Yeah.
And it's important for queer women to find representation where they can when there was so little of it.
That's exactly what I mean.
Willow's a great example.
Yeah. And so, like, the ones on these lists that I found that were actually, like, legit bisexual characters, there's so few that actually, like, use the terminology. Like, there's, from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Stephanie Beatrice's character. I didn't watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but Rosa Diaz is clearly one.
And I think she actually does use the word bisexual out loud with her mouth.
Yep, yeah. Yep. I watched I think maybe the first season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but apparently there is a character named Daryl Whitefeather who has an entire song called Gettin' By that I watched on YouTube this morning, and it's fucking hysterical.
Oh, that's
It's
great.
so cheesy. I loved it. But there just aren't any. There's Villanelle from like 3 years ago from Killing Eve, who's also a murderer, a serial killer. They're just, Kelly Torres is the big one for me. Grey's Anatomy.
I did not watch Grey's Anatomy.
Oh my God. It's still on. You could start now.
Jesus.
But like Kelly Torres starting out dating a man, ending up with a woman, but using the frame of bisexuality and not like that she was a lesbian who, you know, had been with a man before. But man, these lists are like so desperate to find fit like options. And they're all recent. They're all recent. And so I don't think that you can really like underestimate the importance of something this upfront about this type of sexuality, even if it does use the wrong terminology and even if it does like come from maybe not the best source.
If you take all of the sexuality and romance out of this movie, like it's still Kevin Smith being like there. I had some genuine laughs. I did. I was worried that wasn't going to be the case. And sadly, a lot of them come from Banky.
I know. There's some really good lines.
Kevin Smith is, you said at the beginning of this episode, that Kevin Smith is really interested in and often writing about like homosocial relationships.
Yeah.
And it's so annoying that Holden, that it does turn out that Banky, I don't know. It's hard to say whether or not.
No, I'm with you. I think it's way too easy.
To say that like Banky is in love with Holden and whatever. But I do think it's interesting, and it's like, I think where Kevin Smith often shines is in writing those relationships, is in writing friendships. So many of his movies are about two dudes hanging out together, and various like you know, like Jay and Silent Bob, who are, he says, like, you know, they refer to each other as their heterosexual life mates.
Yes.
Not in this movie, but in general. And I think that's really sweet. And Holden and Banky, there's a version of them that isn't so fraught that is nice. And like Bartleby and Loki and Dogma, like he really loves to write two men hanging out together. And I think that's something I'm still happy to see him do. Dante, Randall and Dante, like.
Yes, lots of pairs of men that are life partners and clearly in love, but, you know.
But maybe platonically, I think it...
Yeah. Well, so Kevin Smith has said that he is bi-curious, but not brave enough to commit. So, you know,
Stupid.
I think
So
that is...
stupid.
I know. But it's also all of his characters.
Yeah.
It's all of them.
And that's what I mean. Like, and those are the characters who feel the most real and are the ones that I love the most. And it's like, this is why, like, when we say write what you know, this is why. Because like, it's fine if Jay and like Jay and Silent Bob are a little problematic in the way they talk to each other, because they're coming from a real place in a way that Alyssa and Holden don't feel like they're coming from a real place.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I think that is really where, and I think it's why a lot of the guys that we know and are still friends with that may have sounded like these guys when we knew them attach themselves to Kevin Smith, because there's a more sensitive but version of masculinity that still has that like bravado, but is also gushy and sweet under the surface.
Right.
For the other men in their life that, like, I think a lot of the guys we know relate to.
Yeah. Well, and I think,
look at me
like,
speaking for men.
Well, I think that, like, I always joke, I'm like, I'm 37 years old and now I suddenly have, like, a group of, like, middle-aged straight white dudes that I spend a lot of time with. And it's I think there is, like, that's exactly it. There's, like, now we're kind of painting Kevin Smith in that slightly more enlightened way where I'm like...
Well, it's a spectrum.
Right? Straight male friendships are a spectrum.
But, like, so is the level of enlightenment of certain groups of people, you know?
Exactly.
And so...
Yeah, it's funny. There's been this discourse lately. Somebody posted, did you see the TikTok post or any of the conversation around it about the woman crying because she invited 20 of her boyfriend's male friends to his party and none of them would go?
No, I'm on Underground Mine Girl TikTok right now that I still need to get you caught up on.
Yes, please.
And Eel Pit TikTok.
This showed up on my Instagram, so it could have happened weeks ago, the way that, like, the trickle-down effect there. But she was crying because she couldn't believe that, like, none of his friends would show up for him. And so many dudes in the replies and other people too, but we're like, that's just men. Like, we don't talk to each other about anything. We don't show up for each other, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I was surprised at how many people responded that way, because most of the men I know, like, would do show up for each other and would be there.
They're
and
Kevin Smith boys.
Yeah. And I guess that's, interestingly, like, that is, I guess, the difference. And I was surprised to be like, I always think that's the stereotype, that men are stoic and don't want to talk to each other about their feelings and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But if you really get down to it, men are so nice of me and so enlightened of me to say, like, men can be complicated too, you know? Like, men can be in touch with their feelings too if we let them.
Oh,
but
God.
apparently, like, there is something to that.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe it has to do with most of the men that I know being raised on a diet of Kevin Smith movies. Like, maybe, I don't know.
It's like a permission structure for being, like, sappy with your friends.
Yeah.
You know? It's a different way of looking at male friendship that was not as common pre-Kevin Smith that I can see.
Yeah, totally. That's very interesting.
I think it's a really good thing, honestly.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I think that in some ways, I read somewhere, I have so many articles that I pulled up that I don't know where I found this, but I definitely read somewhere about how Banky is this, like, interesting in-between way for guys who are, like, super insensitive and, like, use homophobic slurs to also see themselves as, like, able to evolve. I don't know. I mean, I think we're giving a lot of credit here now, but like, I think that is an example of a type of, both of them are, Holden and Banky, of a sort of man on the way maybe to something better.
Yeah.
You know?
Banky is really tough.
Yeah, he is really tough.
Because it's like, there are moments, if we can take the homophobic language out of it, if we can just take how he is,
he's still a lazy perv.
He's still a lazy perv, but he is, on the one hand, Banky is more redeemable to me if he is not gay or queer, because there are moments where he says, like, you know, his issue with Alyssa is he's worried she's going to get in the way of what he and Holden have built together. And Holden says, like, she's not going to get in the way of the comic. And he's like, that's not what I'm talking about. And it's kind of like almost sweet to be like so protective of his relationship with his best friend, especially because here's something else. Banky is not wrong. Alyssa does get in the way. The second, before they're even dating, she's like, oh, I wanted to come visit. He bails on a work commitment. Yeah. Immediately for this woman.
And he's not her fault.
No.
It's
he's
Holden's
just ready
fault.
to.
Yeah.
Totally. And so Banky's kind of right there.
Yeah.
But then what I can't excuse is how homophobic he is if he is just somebody who is really protective of this friendship he has with another man. But then also I hate that trope of, like, because then it's like, well, can I excuse the homophobia if it turns out that it's actually like an expression of his like inward insecurity as a closeted man? And again, as I've already said in this episode, and I've said a million times before, like, I don't have patience for that kind of making a villain out of a queer person because of self-hatred. I hate that. Yeah. So again, I think every character in this movie, depending on the lens you kind of look through while you're watching them, the problematic issues shift and change, and the redeeming qualities shift and change, and you just kind of have to decide where you want to land with them. And for the most part, I want to land on Banky as an asshole.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So last night, when I was watching this movie and kind of freaking out about having to talk about all of the difficult things in it that we have addressed, I found something that made me feel a lot better. So I want to talk now about Chasing Amy, which is a very recent, still in the film festival circuit documentary, written and created by Sav Rogers, a filmmaker who is, I believe, late 20s, maybe early 30s, but pretty young. And it came out of a TED Talk that he gave. I don't know. Did you watch this TED Talk?
I didn't watch the TED Talk, no.
Okay. So he gave a TED Talk in, I think, 2018 about how much this movie meant to him as a queer kid growing up in Kansas City, Missouri. I think it was Missouri. It was either Kansas City, Missouri or Kansas City, Kansas. And how, because of his lack of access to queer media of any kind, he had never been able to picture a different kind of life, right? And how literally this movie, he said he watched it, there was a period of time where he watched it every day for 30 days. And in the TED Talk, he also says, to be fair, I did not know there were other gay movies. Like, he's quite funny. And so this documentary starts out with him and his now wife, like, visiting the locations in the movie. Because of this TED Talk, Kevin Smith made himself available to him. And so it evolves into a documentary that includes people from the film. So it includes interviews with Kevin Smith. Cool. It includes interviews with Joey Lauren Adams. And I haven't seen it because it is still on the film festival circuit, but I've read reviews of it and I've read interviews with Sav. And there is a moment in the middle of the movie where he, as a filmmaker, during an interview with Joey Lauren Adams, is forced to sort of reckon with the more real life side of making movies in the 90s and her experience as his girlfriend at the time in a movie that was ostensibly about them. I don't know what was revealed in that interview. Apparently it's a a moment where Sav had to like really pause and be like reorient himself to the whole story. It's also a personal story about him and his like path and his wife and all of that. I am dying to see this movie. I just missed a showing of it at Emerson a month ago. But I am really, really excited because it felt really validating to me personally that there was a queer kid from another generation, like beyond your generation, younger than both of us, that had a similar relationship to this movie because of a lack of access to other things, right? Sav, because growing up where he grew up, you know, in the community he grew up in, he didn't see other things. Me, because of the time frame, there weren't other things necessarily that I knew about.
Right.
But I'm so, so excited that this is a thing that exists.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to, when we can get our hands on it, watch it and maybe revisit this topic.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that I appreciate Kevin Smith for his willingness to listen, because he didn't have to be a part of this. And it does not paint him in a nice light for a lot of it. Like, it does talk about how, you know, the problematic parts of it, but also the way his relationship with Joey Lauren Adams, you know, was not necessarily a positive part of this film for anyone.
That is truly fascinating.
Yeah. So there was an interview with Sav in Entertainment Weekly where he says, Kevin had zero defensiveness in our interview process. He was very open with me in a way that was refreshing, talking about the complicated feelings towards the film. And apparently at the end, I think Sav was like apologizing for taking up so much of his time or something. And Kevin apparently said to him, like, you gave me my movie back.
Oh,
like that almost made me cry. Like,
although,
I know.
Here we go again, Kev.
I know.
Here we
He's
go.
being saved
you
by
have
the
to
queer
stop
person.
letting queer people save you.
I know.
But I'll bet, that's obviously
like,
this is a more real and complicated version of,
So
I was doing a little joke there.
I know. But I highly recommend watching the TED Talk while the movie is still inaccessible, because it does.
I'll link to that in our show notes, of course.
It's called The Rom-Com That Saved My Life. And there was something he said in this that really was like a punch in the stomach. He said, he's talking about when he was growing up and bullying, and he says, see, it sucks when everyone else knows you're queer before you do, because then you don't have anything else to protect yourself with.
Yep.
And I just was like, that was just, so everybody should watch
that's a
that.
real one.
Watch I am still thinking about it. So I highly recommend when this documentary becomes more widely available. It's gotten really good responses at the film festivals that it's been at.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It's like it's not just about this movie. It's a bigger conversation about representation and about the evolution of sort of queer language and queer culture. I'm like super excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to find a way to watch that.
I know, I searched all over the place. It's not available. Not yet.
Eventually,
anyway.
I'm sure we'll be able to.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's our Jersey connection in this?
It's hard to find. It's hard to find.
Man, that's what there's that scene when Holden realizes that that Alyssa is a Jersey girl, and they go back and forth. He just shouts out a few different towns, and she talks about the different, I thought that was really, there's smoking in a diner. Everybody is smoking all over this movie.
Oh my God, I know. Smoking everywhere.
The moment that Alyssa falls in love with Holden officially is when she's struggling to light her cigarette, and he takes the lighter and pulls out the safety, and then she's like, oh, I thought this guy was an idiot the whole time, but it turns out he's slightly capable. I guess I love him now.
Oh my God, I know. It's so true.
So that might be the Jersey connection in this movie. It's all of the indoor smoking. All the diner smoking.
I will say this made me want to go back and rewatch Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Dogma, just to see, because I've rewatched Clerks and Mallrats in the last 5 years.
Yeah, same.
I think I rewatched Mallrats because of New Jersey is the World.
Same.
And I still haven't seen Clerks 3. I'm like, I feel like I should.
Either.
I should.
Yeah, I do. I need to. I'm just, I think it got okay reviews from people who are fans of Kevin Smith, I think.
I just, there's a magic to some of the earlier ones that I feel like.
Yeah. I really like Clerks 2. It's a different, I know it is directly involved with this universe, obviously. Like, it's literally but it does feel different, but I don't dislike that movie.
I don't either. I've only seen it like once or twice, though, and the other ones I've seen like 100 times. Mm-hmm. And even Dogma, I've seen multiple times. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, I've seen multiple times. Mm-hmm. I do think that, like, once he got to Clerks 2 and now Clerks 3, I was kind of like, it's almost like when you go home for the holidays and you see your high school friends and you're like, oh my God, you're like an insurance salesman and you have no hair. And like, it's just, it reminds you of your own mortality a little bit. It's like, wait, if you're this old, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. So, looking at like Jason Mewes now, I'm like, I can't. Like,
I know.
I was your age. Now I'm your age.
I was your age and now I'm your age. Yeah, it is tough. Eventually I'll watch it. I do think also at some point in the show we might just have to do a full Kevin Smith series.
I know.
This movie made me want to go back and watch and think about all of the other movies.
I agree.
So maybe we'll get there. We'll see.
Yeah, Jason Mewes is 49. He's a little older than me, but not much.
I just listened to him on
he was on Pete Holmes' podcast.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's so lovely. I love Jason Mewes so much.
I know. I forget what a sort of rough start he had in life.
Yeah.
That interview really on You Made It Weird.
Yeah, he talks a lot about his childhood and
his mom.
And it is it's a tough listen, but he is so lovely.
He really is. Yeah. I know. I have such love. Wait, how did I not know this?
What?
I know there's cameos in this movie, right? You see Matt Damon, you see Brian O'Halloran, Dante as the two executives. Did you know that Casey Affleck was the little kid he showed porn to?
No, he's not the little kid he shows porn to. Little kid is the wrong credit for him.
Okay,
I saw that they credit him that way. He's the kid at the beginning who, when they're like busting on him for being a tracer, he calls the kid in line behind him.
Okay.
And is like, what do you think? What would you call somebody he's that guy?
Got it. Okay. Because I didn't realize that Casey Affleck was credited in this movie. That's funny.
Yeah. It's weird that they credit him as little kid because he's like clearly 16 or 17. He's a guy.
That's okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Ben Affleck is in his 20s.
Yeah.
This movie did really well, though. The budget was $250,000 and it grossed over $12 million in theaters.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, Mallrats was notoriously a flop in industry terms. Not to us, not in our lives, but
no, of course not.
No.
It's the blockbuster of my heart.
Yeah.
Kevin Smith becomes a better filmmaker as the movies go on, and I do think that actually kind of loses some of what we're talking about with these later movies. It kind of is the like lack of scrappiness with bigger budgets and all of that. But I will say there's not like, in terms of like filmmaking, there's not really anything interesting going on in Chasing Amy.
No,
he's not like,
he's not an artistic like director when it comes to framing or any of that. It's just pretty, like, he points a camera at people and gives them words.
Yeah, I think he's way more interested in the story he's telling than how it's being
and the language
told. Like, yeah, in a way that like he is. We didn't really talk about this too much, but boy, this movie, it's funny because he does it. Clerks and Mallrats and Dogma as well. There are monologues in these movies, but I think, like I said, this is the first one where he's really trying to like quote unquote say something. Those monologues are. It's like, it's funny when it's, Jason Lee like oh God, I hate that the stink palm is the first thing I thought of. But it's like, it's funny to apply these long monologues to really trivial bullshit.
Yeah.
But then you get to Chasing Amy and people are talking so much and so seriously. And it feels like you can feel Kevin Smith you can feel how young he is when he's making Chasing Amy in those monologues.
And how he's like, I'm writing.
Yeah.
You know?
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, those monologues
tough.
are funny when they're like, you know, Dante at the counter at Clerks, like, you know, spewing off about something, about like the milk ladies or something, you know, some little observation. But yeah, no, it definitely changes when he's trying to pontificate about love and life. And
yeah, that's what I love so much is him applying intense scrutiny to nonsense.
Yeah.
Like, then it's great.
Yeah.
But the second you try to be that intense and thoughtful about something real, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
All right, Kev.
You're 27.
Let's just relax a little bit.
Yeah. Not that 27-year-olds can't have deep feelings, but
He just, he was still cooking, I think.
yeah. And I think he knows he was still cooking.
Yeah. I have a feeling, again, I haven't seen Dogma in a very long time, and that was, when I was younger, probably my favorite of the movies. And I bet that same issue where when I was 14, like 13 or 14, I thought it was really clever, those scenes, and he was being really like cool and subversive about religion. I'm going to bet that when I go back and watch Dogma again, I'm going to struggle in a similar way, but maybe not, because he's a few years older at that point. Not much.
Yeah. I do
we'll see.
think that it's some of that is going to be in there, you know, but that's okay.
Yeah. That's fine. Some of that is in me too.
Yes, exactly. So, solved.
Case closed.
Case closed. I feel like I learned something.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like I learned something. I found a lot of great information, a lot of great perspectives, mostly valid ones, not reactionary. Like, I found a lot of really intelligent discussion about this movie that I was pleased to find. And I was excited to find that documentary.
Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that until I can get my hands on it. So
Yeah. I was like you were about 15 minutes in, I was like, oh no. Like, should we even do this movie?
right.
But I'm glad we did.
Yeah, me too.
I'm glad we did. We'll have a lot of, maybe not a lot, but we will have some links in the description about, like, a link to the trailer for Chasing Amy would be great. And the TED Talk.
Yeah, I'll absolutely link to all of that.
Yeah.
So you guys can also do your reading up if you need
Yeah.
some more to think about with this movie.
And let us know, was this, because I know that some of our listeners are from New Jersey is the world. And, like, I'm curious about people's take on this and other Kevin Smith movies now that you're in your, like, 30s and 40s, as most of them are, like, or people that encountered it later. Like, is it a generational thing? Like, can you see this when you're not at that, like, important age, you know, that important life period where that's so meaningful and still get something out of it? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? That you just made me realize. If you are interested in hearing me and Jodie talk more about Kevin Smith movies, one of our first recorded conversation was about Mallrats.
Yeah.
New Jersey is the World. We did do like
on a live stream.
Mallrats live stream, like not watch along, but like react. Like, I think the topic was, is Mallrats good?
Yeah.
And you and I definitely talked about the, like, representation of female sexuality in that movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a really fun early days of New Jersey is the World
Yeah.
conversation.
I forgot all about that. Yeah.
So I'll link to, I can't link directly to it because it's behind the paywall.
Yeah.
But I'll link to the New Jersey is the World Patreon if you're interested in hearing that.
Cool.
Jodie, I have one more thing before we tell folks what we're watching next week. And we got my favorite email to date last week.
Oh, yes. This is also my favorite email that maybe we've ever received.
Truly so happy. So one of our listeners, hey, Barry, sent us an email sharing some Container Store finds and creations.
Obsessed.
I would love, I think we mentioned it on one episode early on that we're both obsessed with the Container Store and asked for folks to send us pictures, I think. Or maybe I just told you I was going to send you pictures, Jodie, when I went to the Container Store that day.
I think both may have happened, actually.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
And so if just like once a week we could get an email from a listener with pictures of their organization habits and hacks.
Yeah, their favorite container store finds.
Yeah,
you know,
that would be great because favorite email. Maybe we'll start a spin-off podcast
about the container store.
About the container store.
I mean, I did go to IKEA this week in a sort of, sub-container store experience, but still pleasing for my organizational needs.
It just feels good.
It does. I'm actually going to go build IKEA furniture after this that I bought.
Ooh, brag.
I know. I'm excited.
Barry, you're a VIP. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for that email. That was delightful. Speaking of delightful.
Yeah, next week is technically your pick.
Which is, none of this means anything this month, but.
Nope.
I'm so excited that we're doing this. I might cry, though. This might be the first time I cry on our podcast.
Well, it's about time because I think I cried almost every week.
I know. I cry in private.
Okay, Georgie.
That wasn't a judgment. It was actually just a sad admission.
I also cry in private.
So next week is Christmas, obviously. I think that something that Andrea and I agree on is that the Muppets are extremely important.
So important.
So important. Really vital part of my growing up. Probably also my present, but I grew up watching the Muppet Show constantly. Like, I remember sitting on the floor in front of the TV watching the Muppet Show with my parents. Like, all of the Muppet movies were a big deal to me. But the thing that was the biggest deal to me, that I was shocked that a lot of people didn't know about when I was growing up, was Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. And the people that I've met in my life that also love Emmett Otter, I feel like I'm bonded to forever because of that. Like, literally, I have a friend who I met in 2005 who every year sends me like Emmett Otter memes around Christmas time. And that's one of the only times we speak all year. Like,
it's so funny. I love that.
Yeah. One of my friends just showed her daughter the movie for the first time. Her daughter's like 4. And she sent me like a video of her daughter like dancing to the music on the couch. And I lost my shit.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
I can't.
You watch it every year, right?
Yes. I have since I was a small child.
I love this movie very much, of course. I just haven't seen it in a very long time. So I'm excited.
You're going to cry.
To go back. Of course I am. I'm so ready. Oh, where do we watch this one?
I think it might be on Amazon.
Oh, it's free if you have free, but on Amazon Prime you can watch it without. It's free on Amazon Prime.
It's also extremely short. This is not a full-length movie. My mom and I watched this movie every year growing up together. It's got, I would argue, some of the best music in any Muppet or other like movie of this genre. I mean, like, there's some great music in like the Muppet movie and things like that, but the music in this movie, Paul Williams.
Can't wait to watch this.
Oh my God, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Also, if you watch it on Amazon Prime, you won't find the bloopers, I don't think. So I'm going to link to the bloopers in this episode so that you can remember to watch them for next week. Watch the movie first, I guess. It doesn't really matter.
No, definitely watch the movie first because the movie is so like sincere and like just such a little bundle of perfect time capsule. Then watching the bloopers to remind yourself of who made this shit is the best.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But I'll link to them in this episode notes just so you have them.
Yeah. And they changed my life when I saw them. My feet are so stapled.
That the bloopers are such a good example. I've said this a few times over the course of this show of like, there are certain things that you put in a blender to get my personality.
Yeah.
And Jug Band Christmas doesn't really go in the blender, but the bloopers absolutely do.
Yeah. 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 For me, it's both, but the bloopers are extremely important to me. Who are we, Ma?
I can't wait. I can't wait.
I know, I'm so
really
excited
to talk about this.
It's a very short movie. I don't really know what our conversation is even going to be about, but we'll find out when we get there. I mean, yeah. I just think it's worth talking about since we're doing our favorites.
I'm sure we'll find some weird minutia to pick apart and obsess over for an hour.
For sure. I have no doubt.
I'm not worried. If you listeners want to let us know ahead of time if this is a movie you've seen and loved, if you have memories of watching it or anything you want to share, shoot us an email, watcherspodnj@gmail.com, and let us know, and we'll share them in the episode next week.
Yeah.
If you send them to us before next Sunday, just to give you an idea of how quick our turnaround is.
One of my favorite, like, right before COVID memories was Christmas of 2019. Mm-hmm. They re-released this in the theater and paired it with, like, Fraggle Rock Christmas, I think.
Oh, my God.
And I went to see it with my best friend and her husband and a couple of friends. And I have never looked happier than I was sitting in that movie theater watching it on the big screen with people, like, singing along. I mean, it was...
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm bummed I didn't know.
It was an amazing experience.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And we'll see you next week for that. Like I said, email us, watcherspodnj@gmail. Find us on Instagram @watcherspodnj. Jodie, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram @Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM.
And I'm @AQ Andrea Q.
We will see you. Where are we going to see you? We'll see you on the river.